Hey guys, how you doing? Hope you're doing well. My name is Raelan and I am going to be talking today a bit about my experience with chronic fatigue syndrome. I lived with chronic fatigue syndrome for about 10 years before I was finally able to recover, but thankfully I did completely recover. And what I'm going to be talking about today is the role that the changes that I made with my diet played in my recovery process. And the reason that this is important is because I truly believe from the depths of my soul that had I not made these changes, I never would have recovered. So specifically, I'm going to be going through 5 changes that I made and what those changes did for my body and how they contributed to my healing. Before we get started, it's important for you to know that I'm not a doctor or a healthcare professional of any kind. I'm not a registered dietitian. I'm just simply someone who figured out how to recover from chronic fatigue syndrome and now wants to share my experience with others. Nothing that I share in this video should be construed as medical advice, and you should absolutely talk to your trusted healthcare professionals and do your own further research before deciding if anything that I talk about might be right for you. All right, let's get right into this. Now, although diet wasn't the only thing that led to my recovery from CFS, it did end up being a massive part of the equation. And I don't think there will ever be a one-size-fits-all plan when it comes to nutrition. But I have found that when it comes to CFS recovery, that there are some specific things that you can do that dramatically speed up your recovery time and propel you towards full recovery from CFS. Of the 5 changes that I made when it came to my diet, the first change was to start eating fermented foods every single day. Why they are important, as many of you probably know, is that they are naturally rich in probiotics. When it comes to healing from CFS, in my experience, this is the absolute best place to start. Because if your microbiome, that community of microorganisms living in your gut, isn't in order, then nothing else is going to fall into place. Over the years, I've spent literally thousands of dollars on probiotic supplements, and I plowed through bottle after bottle after bottle, but no matter how many I took, I never saw any improvements in my health. Until one day, I came across a book called The Diet Myth by Tim Spector, and he got me really excited about probiotics and their potential to aid with healing once again. And the reason I got excited was that his approach was different than the approach that I'd taken in the past, because he advocated taking your probiotics in food form. So once again, really excited about the potential healing benefits of probiotics, I started including fermented foods into my meals every single day. And I just could not believe the changes I saw in my body just from this one simple change. The progress I was seeing was significant and it was undeniable. My food digestion got better, I was less bloated, all sorts of random infections that I used to get, like UTIs and yeast infections, just stopped. Like almost overnight stopped, and to this day have never ever come back. My immune system seemed to be functioning better. I got sick less with colds and flus. So it was just really incredible what this one small change could do. Now, one important thing to remember if you are only just introducing these things to your diet now is that you need to start small, because flooding your body with billions and billions of probiotic bacteria all at once is going to be a shock to your system, and it's going to be really uncomfortable for a while. And the last thing about fermented foods is that it's important to not only eat the fermented foods, but to eat a diet that's rich in a lot of fiber, plant-based fiber, because there is a symbiotic relationship happening between the probiotics and those high fiber foods that you're eating. Those high fiber foods, those vegetables, are prebiotics, so they are actually what the probiotics are eating once they're living in your body. So you need a combination of the two for everything to thrive. It's important to, as much as possible, stay away from things like antibiotics and the birth control pill, because they will wreak havoc on your microbiome and undo much of the good work that you've been doing. All right, the second change that I made was to switch to a predominantly whole foods, plant-based diet. Now, when I first, once again, got really serious about healing towards the end of my 10 years with chronic fatigue syndrome, I ate lean meats, a lot of vegetables, low starch, fairly low carb, no processed foods, and I was seeing a little bit of progress with my health, but it was really slow. And once I made the switch to a whole foods, plant-based diet, that progress really just took off. It was really incredible how much this helped my recovery. And I talked in my last video about how the whole foods plant-based diet was really what enabled me, or one of the key things that enabled me to start exercising again. And as I'm sure many of you know, exercising with chronic fatigue syndrome can be virtually impossible. And this really helped my body to thrive and to recover better from exercise, which was just incredible. And I made the change almost overnight. I thought it was going to be difficult, but it really wasn't difficult at all. I thought it was gonna feel restrictive and like I was missing out on all this great food and just like this massive sacrifice I was making for my health, but it really didn't. I still eat this way to this day. My diet is about 95% whole food plant-based, if not more, if probably closer to 100, and I just love it. The third change I made when it came to my diet is that I started incorporating intermittent fasting into my daily routine. Some of the biggest changes and leaps forward that I saw in my health were when I started giving my body some breaks from consuming solid food. So there's a lot of great information out there that talks about the benefits of fasting and how it can help healing. One book that I would recommend is called The Blue Zone Solution by Dan Buettner. I'm not sure exactly how to say it, but I'll put a link to it below if you want to check it out. But in his book, in his series of books, but they go around the world and they study the various communities that seem to be the healthiest and that live the longest. And then they look at what commonalities there are between these different groups to try and determine what it is that's causing this longevity. So in the Blue Zone Solution, he talks about how fasting is something that is seen common amongst most of these communities. So whether due to circumstance or choice, it's something that's happening in their lives. And in his book, he really breaks down kind of the science and the biology of what's happening in our bodies when we fast and what it is about that process that leads to healing. So if you're interested in learning more, this is a good place to start. Now, what intermittent fasting looks like for me varies. My current schedule, which has been my schedule for quite some time now, is that I only consume solid food between 10 a.m. and 6 p.m. So I have breakfast at 10 and I eat dinner by 6. But then after 6 and before 10 a.m. the next day, I don't eat any solid food at all. I still consume healthy beverages, so I'll have water, I'll have tea, I'll have kombucha. Now that I'm recovered from CFS, I'll have some low caffeine coffee. I just don't have any solid food because I really found that giving my body that break from the taxing work of digestion and elimination really allowed it to focus its energy on other things, such as healing from CFS. So once you've been doing the intermittent fasting for a while and you're comfortable with it, it seems that your body is reacting well to it, you're seeing some improvements with your health, then the fourth thing I recommend is doing some periodic juice fasting. What this is designating a set period of time where you consume nothing but freshly made vegetable juice with a little bit of fruit juice thrown in if you'd like for extra flavor. My juice fasts last anywhere from 1 to 3 days in duration. I've definitely done longer ones in the past, but I find the longer ones are just too taxing on both my body and my mind. So now 1 to 3 days is the zone that I stick to. What I'll do, I typically do them dinner to dinner. So if you're doing just a 1-day juice fast, eat dinner on Monday, for example, and then don't have any solid food again until Tuesday at dinner time once again. And in between that time, just consume your freshly made vegetable juice. I make up one big batch for each day because I find that after about a day, it starts going off and it doesn't taste very good. So I'll make up a big jug, I'll throw it in the fridge, and that's what I'll drink throughout the day. I make it up of things like cucumber, celery, beetroot, carrots, leafy greens. You can put ginger in there. I usually put 1 or 2 pieces of fruit in the whole jug. Things like apples, oranges, lemons, limes, all taste really good. Now, if you decide that juicing might be right for you, then you're going to probably want to invest in a good quality juicer. I started out years ago with a really cheap one, and it didn't take long before I realized that I had to ditch it and go buy a new one. The cheaper ones, unfortunately, tend to destroy the nutrients in the juice, and you don't get as much juice out of the produce itself. So even though you're saving money on the juicer, you have to buy so much more produce, and it ends up costing you more in the long run. And the cheaper ones can't juice things like spinach and other leafy greens, so you're missing out on all those nutrients that you could be putting into your juice. I have an Omega brand juicer that I've had for over 10 years now, and I've lugged it all over the globe, and it has never failed me. So I can put a link to that one below if you're interested in checking it out. The fifth change I made when it came to my diet was that I learned that there were some things that absolutely just had to go. That eating the wrong foods will likely keep you sick forever, and absolutely nothing is worth that price. There just doesn't seem to be any way to feel great while eating crap, unfortunately. Trust me, I've tried. So when it comes to chronic fatigue syndrome recovery, I found that there are 4 culprits that really make healing difficult. And the first one is added sugar. So any sugar that is not naturally occurring in food. Whenever I had added sugar in my diet, I found that it put me on a blood sugar roller coaster. My blood sugar would spike and then it would crash, and it would leave me feeling terrible and leave me feeling like I needed more sugar to feel good again. It really was just a mess. And I've since learned that eating sugar wreaks havoc on your microbiome that you've worked so hard to build up and get into this healthy state. So eating that sugar, you're just undoing all that great work that you've done. And also, eating sugar completely messes with your sleep. And sleep is so vital for CFS recovery. So when it comes to recovering from chronic fatigue syndrome, I believe that sugar just has to go. The second thing that has to go when you're recovering from chronic fatigue syndrome is alcohol. Now, there's a great book out there on this topic by an author named Annie Grace, and the book is called This Naked Mind: Control Alcohol, Discover Freedom, Find Happiness, and Change Your Life. And in it, she goes into all the ways that clever marketing campaigns have duped us and shielded us from the fact that alcohol really is a toxic drug that is doing immeasurable damage. So when it comes to chronic fatigue syndrome recovery, alcohol and CFS just do not mix. Alcohol is doing so much damage, even though you can't see what's happening on the inside. It weakens your heart, it damages your liver, it causes various types of cancer and all sorts of other horrendous stuff. And another great book that I would recommend called Undo It: How Simple Lifestyle Changes Can Reverse Most Chronic Diseases. Dr. Dean Ornish and Ann Ornish highlight how even consuming just 1 alcoholic beverage per day can do significant damage to your body. And when it comes to alcohol, many CFS sufferers get the added bonus of this sort of super hangover, whereas a typical alcohol hangover might last 1 or 2 days for the average person, but when you have CFS, it can last many days or even weeks. So it really just is not worth the price that you're going to have to pay. The third thing that needs to go when you're in the throes of CFS, and I suspect some people aren't going to like me for this one, but it's caffeine. Caffeine really has no place with CFS recovery. There's a doctor out there, Dr. Jacob Teitelbaum, not sure how to say that one either, but he's the medical director for the fibromyalgia and fatigue centers, and he speaks out about this, saying that when it comes to CFS recovery, the caffeine really has to go. It further exhausts your adrenal system and causes all sorts of problems. So the reality is, when it comes to caffeine and CFS, that caffeine is just an energy loan shark. I know it can be tempting to drink a beverage that's going to give you energy when you are, by definition, chronically low on energy, but caffeine is always going to take so much more than it gives. You might get a little boost, but you got a heavy crash coming afterwards. So when you are recovering, it's best just to leave this out. And the last thing that needs to go when you are recovering from CFS is processed foods. Now, I think most of us are aware of the health dangers of processed foods by now, but yet, despite this knowledge, so many of us are still consuming them, so I think it bears repeating. So when I'm talking about processed foods, I mean things like cereals and candy bars and ramen noodles and potato chips and sodas, basically anything you can find in a convenience store. So stick to whole foods, things that look like they did when they were found in nature, things that your great-grandmother could look at and identify as food and tell you what it was. And once you make the switch and leave all that garbage behind, you'll find that you don't even want it anymore. Once you retrain your brain and retrain your body, you see it as toxic crap that has no place going into your body. So as much as you can, keep the processed foods out of the picture. All right, so a recap. 5 tips for using diet for chronic fatigue syndrome recovery. The first is to start consuming fermented foods every single day. Second is to switch to a predominantly whole foods, plant-based diet. The third is to incorporate some sort of daily intermittent fasting. The fourth is to start doing some periodic juice fasting. And the fifth is to ditch the added sugar, caffeine, alcohol, and processed foods. Even now that I'm recovered, I no longer make compromises when it comes to my diet. I have realized the costs of eating the wrong foods, and those costs are so much higher than most of us ever realize. And I truly love the way I eat now. Food now is just a joy. There's no guilt around it, there's no stress attached. Now that my microbiome is in order, there's no issues with problematic food cravings or issues with overeating or portion control. Food is just this happy, beautiful thing that I get to enjoy every day and watch it help me thrive. All right, that's all for today. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video and found it informative. If you did, it would be great if you could hit the like button below and also hit the subscribe button if you'd like to see more videos like this talking about chronic fatigue syndrome recovery. It would also be super helpful if you could throw some comments below letting me know what you liked about this video, what you'd like to hear more about, maybe suggesting other topics related to chronic fatigue syndrome recovery that you'd be interested in hearing about. I post new videos each week on Wednesday, so I hope you'll join me for the next one. That's all for today. Goodbye for now, and I hope to see you next week.